They laughed when my father raised his glass and called me wasted space. I just booked a flight 3,000 miles away to build a new table where every seat is equal. They thought I left out of pride. I left to build something they could not break. The night I opened in Kodiak, Alaska, my father showed up uninvited. He raised his new glass, but this time, the whole town was watching. My name is Quinn Howard. The crystal on the table vibrated. It was a low, almost undetectable hum. The frequency of a house full of people pretending. My mother's prized Waterford, the rims thin as a threat, shivered every time the heavy front door opened to another gust of Charleston wind, letting in another relative dutifully performing their Thanksgiving pilgrimage. We were in the formal dining room, a place reserved for judgment and holidays, which in our family were the same thing. The air was thick with the smell of turkey and old money, of beeswax polish on the antique sideboard, and the faint, sweet rot of the floral centerpiece. The mahogany table, a dark, gleaming beast Patrick Donovan loved more than most people, was set for 20. It was the same table that had hosted Howards and Donovans for generations, its surface a map of old water rings and subtle scratches, each one a story of a glass slammed down in anger or a celebration cut short. I sat halfway down its length, not important enough for the ends, not young enough for the children's table in the kitchen. I was in the murky middle, the territory of unmarried daughters in their mid-20s. At the head of the table, my father, Patrick Donovan, held court. He was a man built to sit at the head of things, broad shoulders, a thick mane of silvering hair, and a voice that never questioned itself. He was on his second bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light from the overwrought brass chandelier above us. That chandelier was his, too. He'd had it installed after Cole, my older brother, won his first state championship, a monument to the correct kind of success. My brother, Cole, sat at Patrick's right hand. Of course he did. He was the sun, and we were all just required to orbit him, to photosynthesize his achievements. His wife, Jessica, sat beside him, her laughter a bright, tinkling accompaniment to his every mumbled word. She was practicing for the role of matriarch, and the audition was going well. Across from them sat aunts, uncles, and cousins, a sea of familiar faces wearing their Thanksgiving masks, their smiles tight, their eyes sharp, ready to note every success, every failure. My mother, Eileen, sat at the opposite end of the table, the official foot. Her role was to absorb and deflect, to manage the emotional temperature of the room. She was a beautiful, tired woman who had made a career out of smoothing the sharp edges of the men in her life. Her eyes met mine for a split second, a quick, nervous dart, before focusing on the gravy boat. Be good. The look said, don't start. I had no intention of starting. I was just there to observe, to log the data. The scrape of a knife against a porcelain plate, the way the light hit the silver, making it look sharp, dangerous, the rhythmic clinking of ice in Patrick's glass as he swirled it. Dinner was a performance. Cole recounted a recent win at his law firm, the story polished to a high sheen. Jessica talked about the preschool admissions process for their 3-year-old, as if it were a campaign for military intelligence. The conversation was a carefully curated exhibit of the Donovan family brand success, lineage, and unwavering confidence. I kept my head down, moving the cranberry sauce around my plate. My own life, my freelance coding gigs, my small workshop where I was trying to design furniture wasn't fit for this table. It was too quiet, too small, too mine. It didn't reflect back on Patrick Donovan in the way a state championship or a corner office did. Then came the moment. The parade of pies, as my mother called it, was placed on the sideboard. The coffee was poured. Patrick Donovan stood, his glass refilled. The room went quiet. This was the tradition, Patrick's toast, the annual definition of who is worthy. He held his glass high, the crystal catching the light, projecting little rainbows onto the ceiling. The chandelier, I noted, was vibrating again, just slightly, a low metallic creak. To family, he began. The opening salvo, a chorus of To family murmured back, "To another good year. Cole, you've outdone yourself, son." He nodded at Cole, who beamed, raising his own glass in a mock humble salute. "Jessica, the boy is brilliant, and he's lucky to have you steering the ship." "Oh, Patrick, stop," she giggled, but her eyes shone. He went on, thanking his sister for hosting, acknowledging an uncle's recent retirement. He was masterful, weaving a narrative that placed him firmly at the center, the benevolent patriarch bestowing his approval. I watched him, my hand resting on the table, my thumb tracing the edge of my knife. I felt my phone, snug in my pocket, ready. He turned his gaze down the table, past the centerpiece, his eyes sweeping over the lesser relatives until, finally, they landed on me. His smile didn't change, but his eyes hardened, just a fraction. It was the look he gave a piece of furniture that was in the wrong place. "It's a wonderful thing, a full table," he said, his voice booming with false warmth. "A sign of a man's success. You look around, and you see the people who have built this family." He gestured toward Cole. "And the people who will build its future." He paused, taking a sip. The timing was perfect, as always. "You see," he continued, "there are kids who go out and make you proud. They build things. They carry the name." He smiled directly at Cole. "And then there are kids who, well," he chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Kids who just take up space." The line dropped. It wasn't a shout. It was a shiv. Slid neatly between the ribs. The laughter started with Cole. It was a loud, barking laugh, full of bourbon and privilege. Jessica's followed, high and sharp, then the uncle, then the aunt. It spread like an oil slick over the surface of the conversation. Thick and toxic. The children at the end of the table, my young cousins, didn't understand the words, but they understood the cue. They laughed, too, their voices piping and hollow. The sound filled the room, the sound of my erasure. I didn't move. I didn't flush. I didn't cry. My heart rate didn't even quicken. It was the calm of a surgeon who has just confirmed a diagnosis they long suspected. My mother's face was a mask of polite panic. Her eyes screamed at me, "Laugh. Pretend it's a joke. Smooth this." Instead, I focused on a point just past Patrick's shoulder. I let the laughter wash over me, a physical, sickening wave. My right hand slipped into my pocket. My thumb found the side button of my phone. I double-clicked. The faint, tactile buzz confirmed it was recording. I wanted the sound. I wanted the evidence, the clink of glasses as they toasted my irrelevance, the specific tenor of my brother's laugh. I held the phone steady for 10 seconds, capturing the peak of their amusement. Then I clicked it off. I brought my hand back to the table. I picked up my dessert knife. I didn't look at it. I looked directly at Patrick Donovan, whose smile was just beginning to fade, sensing his performance had not landed on me as intended. I placed the knife on the plate, aligning it perfectly, horizontally, with the tines of the fork beside it. The silver made a quiet, definitive click against the china. I straightened my back. I could feel the old cane-back chair against my spine. My eyes, I knew, were bright. It was not the brightness of tears. It was the brightness of a high beam. When the laughter had died down to nervous titters, I spoke. My voice was clear, level, and carried easily in the sudden silence. "You know, you're right, Dad," I said. The silence didn't just fall. It crashed. It sucked the air from the room. The chandelier gave a sharp krr-eek as if the house itself was tensing. Patrick's face went rigid. This was not in the script. "It is crowded in here," I continued, my tone conversational. "Which is why it's a good thing I just put a deposit down on an apartment 3,000 miles away." I let that hang. 3,000, a good, solid, spoken number. "You all won't have to make room for me anymore. I'm sure you'll appreciate the extra breathing room next year." My mother, Eileen, made a small sound, a choked gasp. "Quinn, don't," she whispered. "Don't make this hard for your father." "Don't make this hard for him," the family motto, the words that had kept me invisible for 25 years. "He's not the one who has to pack," I said. Still looking at Patrick, I looked around the room. The walls were covered in our family's visual history. It was all Cole. Cole in his tiny football uniform. Cole holding a ridiculously large trophy. Cole graduating from law school, his smile splitting his face. The official portraits. In the few photos where I appeared, I was at the edge, blurred, half cut from the frame. An afterthought. I stood up. I didn't push my chair back. I lifted it slightly, setting it down behind me without a sound. "Wait," Cole said, his voice suddenly sharp. "What did you say, 3,000 miles? What is this? Some kind of stunt, Quinn?" "It's a lease, Cole," I said. I looked at the table, at the half-eaten pies, the stained napkins, the faces frozen in disbelief and, on my father's, a deep, gathering storm of rage. I reached behind me and untied the strings of the apron I'd been forced to wear while helping my mother. I pulled it over my head and folded it once, neatly. I placed it on the seat of my chair. "Quinn, sit down," Patrick Donovan commanded. His voice was low, the one he used when he was about to end a business deal. "No," I said. It was that simple. I walked out of the dining room. I didn't run. I walked. I could feel their eyes on my back. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. I didn't grab a coat. The front porch was cold. The warm, humid Charleston air had turned, and a sharp, salty wind was blowing in from the Ashley River. It bit at my face, and it felt incredible. It felt real. I pulled out my phone. I didn't listen to the recording. I didn't need to. I opened a new note. I typed one line, a message to my future self. New table, equal seats. I got in my truck. It was an old, beaten-up Ford, the only thing I'd ever bought that my father hadn't approved of. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. I drove. I drove past the perfect, historic houses of Charleston, with their manicured gardens and welcoming, gas-lit porches. Every house looked like a postcard. Every house looked like a prison. Every seat in this town was taken, every role assigned, every line written decades ago. I turned onto the highway, heading north. Though it didn't matter, north, south, west, they were all just away. Where was the finish line? I pictured a map of the United States. I wanted to go somewhere his voice couldn't reach, somewhere his influence meant nothing, somewhere cold, somewhere quiet, somewhere the land was new and hard and didn't care about my last name. A name surfaced in my head. I'd read an article about it once, about the fishing fleet and the harsh winters. It was as far as you could get and still be in this country, a dot on the edge of the world, Kodiak, Alaska. It was 3,300 miles, to be precise. Far enough, cold enough, a place so far from this suffocating, polished table that I might finally be able to breathe. A place to build, a place where taking up space wasn't an insult, but the entire point. The Charleston I drove away from was a postcard, and every postcard is a beautiful, flat lie. Our suburb was a masterwork of enforced order, white porches, lawns cut to an identical quarter-inch, and the ancient oaks dripping with Spanish moss, like old, tired secrets. Everything was framed, contained. Our house was the worst of them. It was a shrine to the correct narrative. The main hallway was not a hallway. It was a museum exhibit. Patrick had installed special track lighting, the kind art galleries use, angled specifically to catch the gold plating on Cole's trophies. They lined both walls, shelf after shelf. State junior golf champion, debate team captain, varsity football undefeated. The light polished his name, Cole Donovan, Cole Donovan, Cole Donovan over and over, until it was the only thing you could read. My name was not on that wall. There was no trophy for the person who could field strip a lawnmower engine by age 12, or the person who figured out the faulty wiring in the attic. My life was lived in the negative space of his. Birthdays were the clearest metric. For Cole's 16th, my parents rented a marquee for the backyard. They hired a local band that played passable covers of the Eagles. String lights were draped from the live oaks, and there was a cheer that went up, real applause, when he blew out the candles on a 3-tiered cake. My birthday, which fell inconveniently in the same month, was a quiet affair, a plate of homemade cupcakes, which I usually baked myself. A happy birthday sung off-key by my mother after Cole had already left the table. It was not a celebration. It was an item checked off a list. I didn't mind. Or rather, I learned not to mind. I found my own world. It was a world of copper wire, rosin core solder, and Phillips head screws. I was fluent in the language of machines. I found a broken box fan on the curb when I was 9 and dragged it home. I spent a weekend taking it apart, cleaning the motor, resoldering a loose connection. When I plugged it in and the blades whirred to life, it felt like I had discovered fire. My toolbox was my only true possession. I befriended screwdrivers. They were more reliable than people. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. When I was 14, I found an old, dead transistor radio at a yard sale. It took me a month, but I rebuilt its guts. I had to source a new capacitor from an online forum. The night I finally got it to work, I picked up a faint AM signal from a station in Georgia. It was static and gospel, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I brought it to the dinner table. I was stupid, high on the smell of hot circuits. "I fixed it," I announced, holding it up. The tinny sound of the broadcast filled the room. Patrick didn't look up from his newspaper. "That's nice. Quinn, be useful and get Cole a glass of water." I just stood there, the radio playing. The gospel singer was hitting a high note. "Now," he said, turning the page. My accomplishment became a chore. I turned the radio off. The silence that rushed in was heavy, absolute. I put the radio on the kitchen counter and got the water. Cole didn't even say thank you. My mother watched the exchange. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. She had learned long ago that peace in the Donovan house was purchased with my silence. Keeping the house quiet meant keeping Quinn quiet. This was the ecosystem. It had unwritten, unbreakable laws. Rule 1. Do not make Cole feel bad. His confidence was a delicate, precious thing. A public utility that must be protected. If he failed a test, the house went quiet. If he lost a game, we ate dinner in silence. Rule 2. Do not take up space. This was the corollary to Rule 1. The table was built for a specific number of personalities, and all the main chairs were taken. My role was to be small, to be accommodating, to not have needs that required time, money, or worst of all, attention that could have been directed at Cole. I became a master of invisibility. I learned to walk without making the floorboards creak, stepping only on the joists. I learned to laugh in a small, contained way that never interrupted anyone else's punchline. I learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken: a refilled glass, a cleared plate, a closed door, so that I would be seen as functional, not present. The dinner table itself was a physical diagram of this hierarchy. There were 4 large, carved wood chairs for the adults. There were 2 small, simple, straight-backed chairs meant for children. Cole, being the heir, graduated from his small chair to a large one by the time he was 10. I was kept at the small chair until I was 17. I would sit there, my knees jammed against the underside of the table, my elbows tucked in, trying to eat without being a disturbance. I was a full-grown teenager, sitting in a chair designed for an 8-year-old, at a table that did not want me. The only place my name existed was in my own private world, in the garage. I took a label maker and printed Quinn Howard on a thick strip of plastic tape. I stuck it to the lid of my red metal toolbox. It was a temporary, desperate kind of engraving. It was a way to prove to myself that I existed, that I owned something, that I was, in fact, here. The system was perfect. It was self-policing. The one time I broke the rules, the response was swift and definitive. My junior year, I entered a statewide STEM competition. My project was an analysis of tidal power generation in the low country estuaries, with a working scaled model I had built myself. I won. First place. It meant a scholarship, a trip to the capital. my picture in a statewide newsletter. I came home with the plaque. It was cheap, just plastic and laminate, but it was mine. I made the mistake of bringing it to the living room, where Patrick was reading and Cole was watching film from his last game. "I won," I said, holding it out. Patrick looked up, annoyed by the interruption. He glanced at the plaque. His eyes registered nothing. "That's great. Quinn," he said, his voice flat. "Now is not the time. Don't brag. Cole has his final exams tomorrow. He needs to focus." He turned back to his paper. Cole didn't look away from the screen, where he was watching himself make a tackle. Rewinding it, watching it again, my win was a distraction. My success was an inconvenience. My pride was bragging. That night, I went to my room. I didn't cry. I felt cold, metallic. I took my old cassette player apart. I sat on the floor, surrounded by tiny screws, springs, and plastic gears. I just listened to the sound of the motor whirring, the spindles turning, the soft mechanical click of the play button. It was the only music in the house that seemed to be listening to me. It was the sound of a system that worked, a system that was logical. The silence I lived in was no longer an absence of sound. It became its own element. It was the air I breathed. It was painful. Yes, but you can get used to breathing anything. You can get used to the ache in your lungs, the pressure behind your eyes. You can survive it. But in that silence, in that oxygen-deprived space, a different kind of thought can grow. It starts like a tiny crystallized seed. If they will not invite you to the table, if they will not even see you at the table, then you are not bound by their rules. You are not bound by their table at all. From that silence, a vow began to form, unspoken, unwritten. If I am not given a seat, I will not stand and wait for one. I will leave. I will go so far away that their gravity can no longer hold me, and I will build my own table. Looking back, I see our house had 2 tables. The first was the great, gleaming mahogany one in the dining room. It was loud, full of laughter and bourbon and the sound of Cole's name. It was the table of judgment. The second table was the small, rickety card table I set up in the garage, covered in schematics and soldering burns, lit by a single fluorescent bulb. It was silent, lonely, and covered in the guts of things I was trying to fix. I chose the second table every time. It was the only one that was real. It was where I was practicing, all along, for the third, the one I hadn't built yet. I left Charleston before dawn, before the city's postcard image was fully lit, before the humidity had a chance to set in. I drove 2 towns over to a pawn shop that opened at sunrise. My high-end coding laptop, the one I'd built myself with a custom motherboard, was traded for cash. The man behind the counter, his eyes half closed, barely looked at the specs. To him, it was just aluminum and glass. To me, it was selling the old me, the one who sat in the dark and made things for other people. I took the cash. I had already secured a small, remote freelance contract, a lifeline I'd set up weeks ago, just in case. It was an inventory optimization job for a hardware chain based in Boise. It was just enough. The truck was waiting on a dusty second-hand car lot. A 10-year-old Ford, faded blue, with a reliable engine and a patina of rust on the wheel wells that made it look honest. It was perfect. I paid in cash, the wad of 20s feeling thin. I threw my red toolbox in the back, the one with my name on it. I followed it with my soldering kit, the old transistor radio I'd rebuilt, and a new, heavy-duty 3D printer I'd bought with my last paycheck. Still in its box, I strapped them all down under a heavy tarp. That was it, my entire material life, reduced to what could be tied down by a handful of bungee cords. I drove west, and I did not look back. Charleston, with its antebellum homes and suffocating moss, disappeared in the rearview mirror. It blurred from a city into a green, oppressive smear, and then it was gone. I drove out of South Carolina. I pushed the old truck up the inclines of the Tennessee mountains, the engine whining in a protest I understood. The air changed. The thick, wet blanket of the low country finally broke. The Midwest was a shock. It was a different kind of scale, flat, vast, and relentless. I drove through Kentucky, Missouri, Nebraska. The sky became the main feature, a huge, indifferent blue dome. The land was so flat, it felt like I was driving on the bottom of an ancient sea. I drove for 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. I stopped only for gas and coffee so cheap and black it tasted like asphalt. The radio was my only companion. Scanning through static, angry preachers, and country songs about leaving, my world shrank to the cab of that truck. It was the hum of the tires, the vibration of the steering wheel, and the endless stream of green signs telling me how far I was from somewhere I'd never been. I was a small, mobile point of data, moving across a vast grid. I was no longer Quinn Howard, Patrick's daughter, Cole's sister. I was just the driver of a blue truck. My money was a dwindling resource, allocated for gas and the non-negotiable ferry ticket at the end of the line. I ate cold sandwiches from a cooler I kept on the passenger seat, in a small, struggling diner just outside of Omaha. The air was hot, thick, and smelled of stale grease. The big ventilation fan in the window was rattling. One blade stuck, the motor groaning. I watched the owner, a woman with exhaustion etched into the lines around her mouth, smack it with a broom handle. It didn't budge. "Thing's been busted for a week," she muttered, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It's just the bearing," I said, without thinking. She turned, her eyes suspicious. "You know fans? I know systems," I replied. I ate dinner that night for free. It took me 20 minutes. My red toolbox open on the diner's checkered floor. I disassembled the housing, which was clogged with years of grime. I cleaned, oiled, and reseated the seized bearing, and tightened the mounting bracket that was causing the rattle. When I flipped the switch, the blades spun smoothly, quietly, pulling the hot, dead air out of the room. The owner slid a plate of pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans in front of me. "On the house, kid." I ate, tasting the first real food I'd had in days. My skills, the ones my father dismissed as noisy chores, were currency here. They were worth a hot meal. They were useful. Wyoming was where the world broke open. The relentless flatness of Nebraska gave way to rolling, sage-covered hills, and then to mountains that looked like the teeth of a broken saw. One night, I was too tired, too broke to pay for a motel. I pulled off the highway onto a gravel turnout. Miles from any light source, miles from any other human being, I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. It was deeper than the weaponized silence in my father's house. This silence was not an absence. It was a presence. It was huge, ancient, and cold. I stepped out of the truck. The air was sharp, so cold it bit my lungs. And the sky. I had never seen a sky like it. Back east, the stars are a suggestion, muted by humidity and city lights. Here, they were violent, billions of them, splashed across the dark. The Milky Way a thick, visible, glowing band. It looked, I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity, like a circuit board, a vast, impossibly complex schematic, glowing in the dark. I wasn't an ant crawling on a map. I was a single electron, moving along a designated trace. The road I was on wasn't an escape. It was a connection. It was a wire, leading me from one component, the one that had failed, the one that was corroded, to a new one. I was not running. I was being routed. I stood there for an hour, the cold soaking through my jeans, staring at the circuit board above me. I finally felt a sense of logic, a sense that this was not chaos, but a necessary, efficient transfer of energy. Seattle was wet and gray, a different kind of cold than the dry, clean bite of Wyoming. This was a coastal cold, one that settled into your bones. It was a port city, a place of endings and beginnings. I had 2 weeks before the next ferry to Kodiak. I needed cash, and I needed to learn. I found a job at a lumber yard near the water, working the night shift. It was a 24-hour custom mill that serviced the local boat builders and high-end furniture makers. My job was simple sorting, stacking, and feeding the industrial planers. The work was brutal, physical. My hands, used to the delicate, precise work of wires and solder, were soon rough, raw, and splintered. The smell of sawdust pine, cedar, cherry was a constant, coating my throat. The night foreman was a man named Harlan. He was old, with skin like cured leather and hands that looked like the burls of a tree. He moved slowly, but with an economy of motion that I recognized. He was a master of his own system. He watched me for a few nights. He saw me checking the grain, running my hands over the boards, learning. He saw I wasn't just throwing lumber. One night, during a break around 3 a.m, he found me looking at a beautiful dark plank. "Walnut," he said, his voice a low gravel. "It's beautiful," I said. "It's honest," he replied. "Wood doesn't lie. Not like people." He became a quiet teacher. In the quiet, humming hours before dawn, he showed me how to read the grain, to see the tension in a knot, to understand how a board would want to move, to warp, to live. "Close your eyes," he'd command, pushing a piece of maple into my hands. "Feel that. Feel the temperature of it. Feel the life it had. Wood has a memory. Just like a person. Quinn, you don't beat it into submission. You don't force it. You listen to it. You ask it what it wants to be." He was teaching me about carpentry, but he was also teaching me about healing. He was the opposite of my father, Patrick Donovan commanded. Harlan revealed. He taught me to respect the material, to see the history in its scars. The day finally came. I drove the blue truck onto the Alaska Marine Highway ferry. It was a huge, white vessel that felt like a hospital and a ship combined. I stood on the aft deck, the wind whipping my hair. As we pulled out of the Puget Sound, Seattle's skyline, a monument to a different kind of ambition, faded into the mist. The journey took 3 days. 3 days on the open, dark ocean of the Gulf of Alaska. The wind was relentless, a solid wall of salt and ice. It was a baptism by abrasion. It scoured me, inside and out. I was small. The ship was small. The ocean was everything. On the second night, I was in my tiny, vibrating cabin, fiddling with my old transistor radio. Back on the mainland, it was useless, drowned by the noise of 1,000 stronger signals. But out here, the air was clear. I turned the dial, and through the hiss of the ocean, I found a signal. It was faint, crackling, breaking up. A saxophone, a high, lonely, desperate riff, a jazz station, broadcast from some unknown northern town. It was the sound of life, persisting, a signal in the vast, cold dark. I fell asleep to it. Kodiak did not welcome me. It revealed itself. We docked in a thick fog, so dense I couldn't see the island until we were in the harbor. The first thing that hit me was the sound. It was not the polite, muffled sound of Charleston. It was the raw, industrial shriek of eagles, hundreds of them, perched on masts and dumpsters, their white heads bright against the gray. The second thing was the smell. It was not the sweet rot of the low country. This was the sharp, metallic, primal smell of the ocean. Salt, diesel, and fish, the smell of work. I drove the truck off the ramp. The town was huddled around the harbor, buildings clinging to the side of a steep, dark green mountain. It was functional, not beautiful. Everything, the houses, the boats, the people, was built to withstand a storm. I found the address I'd secured online. It was a warehouse, as promised. But warehouse was a generous word. It was a corrugated tin shed down by the boatyard, its sides streaked with rust, the paint peeling in long, sad strips. I paid the landlord, a man with a face like a knotted piece of driftwood, the first month's rent. He looked at me, looked at my South Carolina plates, and spat. "You'll last 3 weeks," he said. Not to me, but to his dog. I didn't care. I rolled up the groaning metal door. The inside was cavernous, cold, and smelled of rust and old rope, but it was mine. I took a piece of cardboard I'd saved from my 3D printer box and a black marker from my truck. I wrote 2 words on it and taped it to the broken front window. Equal seat works. That first night was the hardest. The fog rolled in from the water, thick and wet, turning the air inside the tin warehouse to a bone-chilling damp. My cot, which I'd bought at a surplus store in Seattle, felt paper-thin. I spread a tarp on the cold concrete floor, put the cot on top, and got into my sleeping bag fully clothed. I was 3,300 miles from everything I had ever known. I was alone, in a freezing tin box, on an island in the middle of the North Pacific. The doubt came. It was a physical, creeping cold. Patrick was right. You are a joke. You are taking up space. You will fail. You will crawl home. My hands were shaking. I reached for my one piece of comfort, the old transistor radio. I plugged it in. The tubes warmed, and it hummed. I found a local station, a broadcast of the high school basketball scores. It was mundane. It was normal. It was human. I laid back, hugging the radio to my chest like a talisman, and stared into the dark. The next morning, I got to work. I spent the last of my savings on a big, propane space heater and a large, detailed map of Kodiak Island. I pinned the map to the wall with a red marker. I began to circle the places that needed new tables: the school, the community center, the church basement that ran the soup kitchen, the fisherman's co-op, the VA clinic. These were the places where the community gathered. These were the places that needed equal seats. This wasn't a business plan. It was a battle map. The work was slow. I was cold. I was broke. My freelance gig paid for coffee and electricity. Nothing more. A message pinged on my phone. I hadn't heard from my family since the night I left. Not a, "Did you get there?" Not a, "Are you alive?" This message was from my mother. It was a photo. Just a photo. It was Cole, standing on the steps of the State House, shaking hands with the governor. He'd been promoted to a junior partner at his law firm. The caption, which she had forwarded from the firm's newsletter, read, "Charleston's brightest." Beneath the forwarded picture, there was only silence, no text from her. The message was clear. This is what success looks like. This is what you left. This is what you are not. My hands were numb from the cold, but my stomach was on fire. I set the phone down. I put on my work gloves. I was about to start on my first prototype, but I needed something. I opened my phone again. I went to my audio files. I found the file labeled Thanksgiving. I hit play. The sound of my father's voice, amplified by the tinny speaker, filled the cold warehouse. Kids who go out and make you proud, and then there are kids who just take up space. The laughter followed. Tinny and sharp. Cole's bark. Jessica's tinkle. The chorus of relatives. It was no longer a sound of humiliation. It was a miter saw. It was a welding torch. It was fuel. I turned the volume up, letting the sound echo off the metal walls. I let their laughter surround me as I picked up my saw and made the first cut. I started with what the ocean left behind. Down by the boatyard, a pile of decommissioned decking from an old trawler was rotting in the rain. It was Douglas fir, dense and heavy, seasoned by 30 years of salt spray and storms. The wood was free. It cost me 2 days of back-breaking labor, prying out rusted, frozen bolts, and dragging the waterlogged planks back to my tin shed. I spent a week drying them near the propane heater. When I made the first cut, the smell of old-growth timber, salt, and diesel filled the warehouse. I refused to sand away the history. Harlan had taught me that wood has memory. I left the dark, oxidized stains where the bolts had been. I didn't hide the cracks. I filled them with a dark, clear epoxy. These were not flaws. They were honor scars. They proved the wood had survived and was stronger for it. The table I built was not elegant. It was heavy, solid, and indestructible. It was the antithesis of my mother's delicate, vibrating crystal. But the tabletop was never the point. The point was the structure beneath it. The problem wasn't the table. It was the hierarchy. The head of the table is a physical position of power, a throne disguised as a chair. I had to design that power out of the equation. I spent the nights on my laptop, the one I'd saved, running CAD software. The generator hummed outside, the only sound besides the wind. The problem wasn't just no head, it was equal height. In Charleston, I had been forced to sit at the low, childish chair long after I had outgrown it. Using my 3D printer, I prototyped a mechanism. It was a modular leg system, not a complex, hydraulic lift, but a simple, robust, pin and sleeve design, a series of holes, a high-tensile steel pin. It was adjustable by hand, in seconds. A child in a small chair, an elder who couldn't bend, a person in a wheelchair, they could all sit at the same level. The table surface would meet them where they were. No one would be below the salt. No one would have to crane their neck to be heard. The hardware was only half the problem. The other half was social. People are trained, like animals, to find the power spot. They walk into a room and instantly assess where is the head. So, I built the software to break the habit. I coded late into the night, fueled by bitter black coffee, the warehouse heater roaring against the cold. I called it Seat Map. It was a simple app, really. You input the number of attendees and the dimensions of the room. It generated a seating arrangement. The algorithm was the key. It was specifically designed to disrupt hierarchy. It generated round or square placements, automatically balanced, with no focal point. It was designed to ensure everyone had an equal sight line. It randomized the power positions near the door or the speaker, breaking up established cliques, forcing new conversations. No head, no foot, just a circle of equal nodes. I had a product. I had no money and no customers. I hauled the heavy, scarred fur table and my laptop to the community center, the church, the school. I offered free demonstrations. Most people nodded politely and showed me the door. The first person who didn't laugh was a teacher named Sarah. She taught a mixed-grade class in Ozinki, a tiny remote village across the water, reachable only by boat or float plane. She looked past the rough wood and saw the mechanism. She pointed to the adjustable pin, her finger tracing the steel. "This," she said, her voice quiet. "This is what I need. I have 9-year-old and 6-year-olds and one boy in a walker, all in the same room." She ordered 6 sets. It was a tiny order, barely enough to cover the cost of the materials, but it was an order. I took the ferry, then a smaller fishing boat, to deliver and install them myself. A week later, she emailed me a photo. It wasn't professional, just a quick, blurry snapshot from her phone. Her students, all sitting around the clustered tables, working on an art project. They were in a perfect, messy circle. The boy in his walker was slotted in, his work surface at the exact same height as the tallest girl. They were all looking at each other. They were laughing. She posted it on the island's main community Facebook page. "No more head of the class or back row," she wrote. "Just us." The post was shared, then shared again. It went viral, Kodiak style. My phone, for the first time, buzzed with inquiries. The local pastor called. He ran the downtown soup kitchen from the church basement. "I saw that picture from Ozinkie. Quinn, we need a table for our community dinners. We can't pay, but we can feed you." "I'll donate it." I cut him off. I gave them the original. The first prototype, the one with the honor scars. We hauled it into the church basement, and it looked more at home there than any furniture in Patrick's house. It felt right. It was an offering, a different kind of prayer than the ones I'd been forced to sit through. The Ozinkie order had drained my cash reserves. I needed raw materials. I went to the fish processing plant down the harbor. Their yard was a graveyard of old oak and pine pallets, grayed by the weather but structurally sound. "I want your scrap wood," I told the foreman, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun and stress. "It's junk," he grunted, not looking up from his clipboard. "Not to me," I said, looking past him into the plant. "What's wrong with your packing machine?" He stopped. "What?" "The large one. It's skipping every third seal. I can hear the pneumatic actuator misfiring from here." He turned, stared at me. "Our regular guy is in Anchorage for 2 weeks. It's costing us thousands a day. I pointed to my red toolbox in the back of my truck. I'll fix it. For the pallets. He thought I was joking. I wasn't. I opened my toolbox. It was a system. A logic problem. A pneumatic solenoid was gummed up with fish oil and grime. I spent 4 hours in the noise and the smell, cleaning, calibrating, and replacing one $5 gasket. I ran a diagnostic. Thwack hiss, perfect seals. The pallets are yours, kid, he said, shaking his head. All of them. I had just bartered my father's noisy chore for the foundation of my business. Then the first real cold snap hit. Kodiak winter isn't like Charleston winter. This was a physical assault. The temperature dropped to 5 degrees, and the wind howled straight off the ice. I got a call from Sarah in Ozinki. Her voice was pained. Quinn, we have a problem. 3 of the legs. They just snapped. My stomach dropped into the concrete floor. I took the boat over. The 3D printed plastic components I had used for the internal parts of the leg mechanism, the prototypes had become brittle in the extreme cold. The metal pins, contracting at a different rate, had put too much stress on them. They shattered. Failure. Complete. Total. Embarrassing. I was a fraud. I was just like my father said, all talk, taking up space. I sat in that cold, quiet schoolhouse, staring at the broken leg. Make, fail. The next step was fix. I couldn't use plastic. Not here. I needed metal. But salt air and cheap steel meant rust. I spent 2 days in the warehouse, rebuilding the design. I used a lightweight aluminum alloy for the housing and high-grade stainless steel for the pins, 2 metals, with a closer thermal expansion coefficient. And I invested the last of my meager cash in a small, second-hand powder-coating gun and a cheap electric oven from a yard sale. The powder coat, a thick, durable, baked-on layer, would protect the alloy from the salt. I went back to Ozinki. I replaced every single leg on all 6 tables. For free. It took me a week. They held. The incident taught me something. The tables weren't just products. They were relationships. They had to be trustworthy. I started an open table night. Every Thursday, I made a huge pot of salmon stew, using scraps given to me by the fisherman who'd seen me fixing the plant's machine. I put my new, improved, powder-coated prototype in the middle of the warehouse. The invitation was simple, tacked to the community bulletin board at the post office. If you've ever been pushed to the edge of the table, there's a seat for you here. Stew is hot at 7. The first night, only 3 people came. A young guy who worked the slime line at the plant, an old woman who lived on her boat, a teenager who'd run away from home. We sat around the table, dipping bread in the stew. We just shared the warmth. A reporter from the Kodiak Daily Mirror, the local paper, heard about it. She showed up one Thursday when the crowd had grown to a dozen. She didn't bring a notepad. She brought a bowl. At the end of the meal, she took one picture. It was a close-up of the table itself, the circle of empty stew bowls, the scarred wood, the sturdy alloy legs. The caption she ran the next day was just 5 words, "The table with no head." The effect was profound. The small orders started coming, not a flood, just a steady, reliable trickle. The local library, the vet clinic's waiting room, a fishing lodge. They were small, but they were consistent. With the first real profit, a few $100s, I didn't buy new clothes or better food. I drove to a retiring carpenter's garage sale and bought a second-hand, cabinet-grade table saw, a precision machine. It was old, heavy cast iron, but its tolerance was perfect. It was the difference between a hobby and a business. My cuts became cleaner, my joints tighter. I also upgraded the software. Seat map was good, but I could make it better. I'd noticed at the stew nights that even without a head, some people still dominated the conversation. I added a new feature, listening points. If you were organizing a meeting, the app could gently track talk time. If one person was speaking for, say, 80% of the meeting, a quiet, non-judgmental notification would appear on the moderator's screen. Invite others to speak. It wasn't a muzzle, it was a nudge, a reminder to share the space. I couldn't build all the tables for all the people who needed them. I was just one person in a tin shed, but the idea was the valuable part. I finalized the design for the powder-coated modular leg, and then I uploaded the CAD files and the schematics to an open-source forum. I published them under a Creative Commons license. No head, equal hearts, build your own. A month later, I got a video link. It was from a woodworkers collective in Fairbanks. They had taken my design and improved it, adapting it for their own extreme Arctic conditions, adding a locking mechanism I hadn't thought of. They posted their improvements, citing my work. Then a group in Oregon adapted it for outdoor park benches. A community was forming, built not on ownership, but on sharing. A heavy crate arrived on the ferry. I had to get 2 fishermen to help me get it into the warehouse. There was no return address, but I knew the freight stamp. It was from Seattle. I pried it open. Inside, packed in straw, was a single, magnificent slab of Claro walnut. It was 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and the grain was a swirling, chaotic, beautiful map of dark browns and ambers. This was not a piece of wood. This was a work of art. This was Harlan. A small, grease-stained envelope was tacked to the side. I opened it. Harlan's handwriting was a scrawl. Saw your open-source files. Good job, kid. You're not just listening to the wood, you're listening to the world. I've been saving this piece for 30 years. Don't use it for a customer. Use it for the first table that's just for you, the one you keep. I ran my hands over the walnut. It was smooth as glass, but warm. It felt alive. I didn't have a laser engraver. I had a small, handheld Dremel tool. I practiced on a piece of scrap pine, my hand shaking. Then, carefully, on the underside of that magnificent slab, the part no one would see but me, I carved the words. It took all night. No head. Equal hearts. I stood back. The warehouse was freezing, the propane heater long since out of fuel. I looked at my work, the dust from the walnut, from the pine, from the fir, coated everything. It was a fine, pale powder, thick on my shoulders, in my hair. Outside. The first real snow of the season had begun to fall, thick white flakes swirling in the light of the single harbor lamp. I looked at the sawdust on my hands. It looked like the snow, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be warm. The first official letter I received at the warehouse wasn't an order. It was an end-of-year property tax assessment from the Kodiak Island Borough. It was a cold, hard number on a piece of paper that informed me, in no uncertain terms, that I was broke. My bank account, which I checked on my phone with numb fingers, had just enough to cover the electric bill and one more propane delivery. The trickle of small orders was just that, a trickle. It was enough to buy screws and saw blades, not enough to build a business, not enough to pay the government for the privilege of existing in a tin shed. And then, as if on cue, the weather alerts began. A low-pressure system, a real monster, was spinning in the Gulf of Alaska, tracking directly for us. The marine forecast, which I had learned to read with the same gravity as a Bible, was predicting hurricane-force winds and significant coastal storm surge. This wasn't a Charleston thunderstorm. This was a force that remade coastlines. The tax bill was due in 2 weeks. The storm was due in 48 hours. I was trapped between 2 different kinds of existential threat. That's when the email arrived. It was from a corporate address I didn't recognize. The subject line was Investment and Partnership Opportunity, Harbor Crown. I had heard of Harbor Crown. Everyone had. They were the fastest-growing high-end furniture brand in the country, the darlings of design blogs, masters of the aspirational rustic look. Their catalogs were full of $1,000 reclaimed wood tables and $500 hand-forged coat hooks. The email was sleek, complimentary, and predatory. It mentioned the buzz I was generating, the lovely human interest story in the Kodiak Daily Mirror. It talked about scaling my vision. It proposed an investment to take Equal Seat Works to the national stage. And then, in the final paragraph, the terms, they would acquire my local brand with a generous cash injection. In exchange, Harbor Crown would take a controlling interest. 70%, and of course, full creative and strategic oversight. 70%. The number felt like a physical blow. Attached was a preliminary marketing brief. I clicked it open. It was a mock-up of a new product line. The Equal Seat Honorary Head Collection. They had taken my design and added a single, ornate, high-back chair to the set. For the modern leader who values inclusivity, the copy read, but still needs to command the room. They wanted to turn my philosophy into a marketing trend. They wanted to take my one core idea, no head, and sell it back to the world as the exact opposite. They wanted to build a throne and slap my name on it. I typed a single-word reply, no. I was about to hit send when a new message popped up from the same sender. My apologies. That was a cold email. I'm actually in Kodiak. My name is Miles Thorne. I'd love to buy you a coffee and explain in person. I'm at the BB on the hill. He was here. This wasn't a fishing expedition. It was an invasion. I had no time for coffee. I'm at the warehouse on the harbor, I wrote back. You have 10 minutes. He arrived an hour later. Just as the first serious winds began to rattle the tin siding, he stepped out of a rented black SUV, a stark, expensive rectangle in the gravel lot. He wore a $5,000 Italian suit and waterproof designer boots, a costume for rugged authenticity. His smile was white, perfect, and held no warmth. It was a smile designed to save you. Quinn, he said, extending a clean, manicured hand. Miles Thorne, what a place you have here. He looked around the cold, dusty warehouse, his eyes flicking over my propane heater, my old table saw, and the slab of Harlan's walnut, which I had covered with a tarp. His gaze was an appraisal. He was calculating what it would cost to tear it all down and replace it. This is a workshop. Mr. Thorne, not a showroom, I said, not taking his hand. I was covered in sawdust and grease from winterizing the generator. Of course. I love the hustle, he said, the smile never wavering. He pulled a thick, leather-bound contract from his briefcase and laid it on my workbench. Let's not dance. Quinn, you're a smart woman. You've built a beautiful story here, and a story is a marketable asset. We're here to help you cash it in. I'm not cashing anything in. I make tables. You make a prototype, he corrected me, his voice gentle, like a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. We make a product, we have factories, we have a supply chain, we have a marketing budget that's bigger than this island's entire GDP. You have this, he gestured to the warehouse, and a very big storm coming. He tapped the contract. I'm offering you a check that would make this all go away. Security, insurance, a real future. He leaned in, his voice dropping. Think of it, Quinn, a real salary, a real design studio. We could even open a flagship branch for you back home. Charleston, maybe your family must be worried sick about you up here. Imagine how proud they'd be, seeing you come home a success. The words hit me like a physical, targeted strike. Proud. Charleston. Family. He had done his research. He was using my father's own weapons against me. The wind howled, and the lights flickered. The single bare bulb above us buzzed, died, and then flared back to life. Sign today, Quinn, Miles said, his voice urgent, a friend's voice. This storm is going to be bad. That roof. He looked up at the groaning metal. Doesn't look sound. Sign. And as of this moment, all this inventory is insured under the Harbor Crown policy. It's protected. You're protected. It was the ultimate temptation. It was the offer to make the struggle stop, to be warm, to be safe, to be successful. I looked at the contract, at the 70% printed in black and white. I looked at his perfect, false smile. No, I said. His smile twitched. I don't think you... I said no, Mr. Thorne. I slid the heavy contract back across the workbench. Equal Seat Works is not for sale. We don't make head chairs. Now please get out. I have to prepare for the storm. His face changed. The savior mask dropped. Underneath, it was all cold. Hard business. It was the look my father gave someone who had just cost him money. "You're making a mistake, Ms. Howard," he said, packing his briefcase. "A very cold, very expensive mistake. Call me when you're wiping the ice off your broken inventory." He left. The black SUV crunched over the gravel and was gone. The storm hit that night. It was not wind. It was a physical being. It was a voice that screamed for 10 solid hours. The metal walls of the warehouse didn't rattle. They shrieked. They buckled and groaned. I wasn't alone. My team, all 3 of them, had shown up just before the worst of it hit. There was Mateo, a high school kid I was teaching to weld, and there were Maria and Jorge, a couple who had worked the fishing boats for 20 years and now preferred the stability of my saw. I was 2 weeks late on their payroll. They showed up anyway. "We're shutting down," I yelled over the noise. "Go home. Be with your families. We'll see what's left in the morning." "We are home, boss," Jorge yelled back, already coiling a set of ropes. "And we're not letting this thing win." We spent the night fighting a war. The lights died at 10, plunging us into a roaring, total darkness. We worked by headlamp, our beams cutting through the freezing, swirling dust. Around 2 in the morning, the sound changed. It was a metallic bang, followed by a sharp, tearing screech, a sheet of corrugated tin on the roof. An old, rusted piece I'd meant to replace had been ripped clean off. The storm was inside, rain and seawater, driven sideways, blasted into the workshop. It was a deluge, instantly soaking everything. "The walnut," I screamed. "Harlan's slab. It was our most valuable, most symbolic thing." We became a frantic, 4-person machine. We threw tarps over the finished tables, over the table saw, over the walnut slab. We lashed them down with ropes, but the wind, now inside the building, was tearing them loose. We were tying knots with frozen, numb fingers, the beams of our headlamps chaotic and frantic. We held a tarp down over the walnut with our own bodies for 3 hours, taking turns, until the sky began to turn a bruised, sickly gray, and the worst of the wind finally began to die. We were soaked to the bone. We were hypothermic, but the wood was dry. At sunrise, we emerged. The world was a mess. Boats were in the street. Power lines were down everywhere. Our roof had a massive, gaping hole in it, but we were still standing. And then, the community came. By 8 in the morning, a truck pulled up. It was the pastor from the soup kitchen. He had a massive thermos of hot coffee and a box of donuts. He was followed by Sarah, the teacher from Uzinkie, who had been stranded in town. She brought soup. By 9. The foreman from the fish plant showed up with a generator, a new sheet of tin, and a crew of 4 fishermen. "Heard you had a skylight installed," he grinned. They were on the roof, patching the hole before I could even say thank you. We were not a business. We were a part of the island. We had survived. Miles Thorne returned at noon. He pulled up in his still immaculate SUV. He got out, surveyed the patched roof, the steaming generator, the small crowd of people sharing coffee. His face was a mask of polite concern. "Quinn," he said, walking over. "My God, what a night. I was worried about you." "We're fine," I said, my voice hoarse. "Listen," he said, "I'm glad you're safe, but I can see the damage. I know you're in trouble. I'm prepared to make one last offer." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, at the tarpaulin-covered slab of walnut. "I can't buy the company," he said. "Fine, but I am a collector. That slab of Clara walnut, I'll buy it from you. Personally. Right now. $10,000. Cash." I just stared at him. He didn't understand. He thought he could buy the symbol. He thought he could buy Harlan's memory. My one piece of private hope. He was a grave robber, showing up after the funeral to pick the flowers. "Get out," I said. "Quinn, be reasonable. Get off my property, Miles, now. This time, The pastor and the fisherman heard me. They stopped working. 4 large, very tired, very real men turned to look at Miles Thorne. He put his hands up, the savior smile back in place. "Just trying to help," he said. He got in his truck and drove away. This time, I knew. It was for good. The next day, the rumor started, a post on the Kodiak Community Facebook page. A friend who works in insurance had heard that the equal seat tables were structurally unsound, that the new modular legs collapsed on the Uzinki kids. It was a lie, but it was a precise, toxic, plausible lie. It was Harbor Crown. It was Miles. If they couldn't buy me, they would bury me. My phone, which had been buzzing with support, went quiet. "We're fighting back," I told my team. I took our last improved prototype. I took the generator. I took my laptop and a cheap webcam. I set them all up in the middle of the warehouse. I scheduled a public live stream. Equal Seat Works public stress test. I started the stream. I explained the rumor, and then I started loading the table. I put my name on the line, literally. I piled on bags of concrete mix from the hardware store. 50 pounds, 100, 200. The table didn't bow. "The rumor is that the legs break," I said to the camera. I took a sledgehammer. I hit the powder-coated alloy leg. The hammer rang, and the table just stood. "This is rated for 300 kilograms, I said. "That's over 600 pounds. I looked at Jorge and Mateo. "Get on." They climbed up onto the table. They stood there, 2 grown men. I climbed up and joined them. The 3 of us, standing on the table, my arms around my team. 400 kilograms, give or take, I said, smiling into the camera. "That's closer to 800 pounds. Our tables don't break. Our legs don't collapse, and we don't sell head chairs. Thanks for watching." I ended the stream. The response was immediate. The community, ashamed they had doubted, rallied, orders flooded in, small ones, but dozens of them. The library bought 3, the VA clinic bought 2. It was a moral victory, but it was a financial nightmare. I now had 34 orders, all of them paid for, and I had spent my last dollar on powder coating materials. I was cash negative. I had the orders, but not the capital to fulfill them. I was more broke than before. I was staring at my bank account, a negative balance. When a new email pinged, the sender was an official Gov address. It was from the Nuniac Island School District, the main admin for all the remote villages. "Ms. Howard, we were incredibly impressed by your live stream demonstration and the structural integrity of your product. We have been following the open source community around your designs. The district is formally decommissioning all standard hierarchy desks. We would like to place an order for 50 classroom sets. We require a firm delivery date of 30 days from today, before the winter ice pack makes the outer islands inaccessible. Please confirm if Equal Seat Works can meet this demand. 50 sets, 30 days. It was impossible. It was a contract that would require a factory, not a shed. It would require thousands of dollars in materials, which I did not have. It was a death sentence. It was a lifeline. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I looked at the patched roof, at my tiny, loyal team, at the red toolbox with my name on it. I typed my reply. "Confirmed. We will meet the deadline." I hit confirm on the email to the Nuniac School District and felt the floor drop out of my warehouse. 50 sets, 30 days. I had $700 in my bank account. I had a team of 3 people who I hadn't paid in 2 weeks. I had a hole in my roof that was patched with a prayer and a piece of scrap tin. I had said yes to an order that I could not, under any circumstance, fulfill. The logic of traditional business said I was finished. A real factory would need 3 months, a massive loan, and a full staff. I had a cold shed. I spent that night staring at the map of Kodiak, the red circles glowing under my desk lamp. Make, fail, fix. This was the fix phase, but on an impossible scale. I couldn't make 50 tables. Not like this. I couldn't be a factory. The realization hit me at 3 a.m, cold and sharp as a power tool. I shouldn't be a factory. My father built a factory, a top-down hierarchy where he was the head and everyone else was a tool. Harbor Crown was a factory. I was building something different. I wasn't building a company. I was building a network. The next morning, I called a meeting. Not in my office, I didn't have one, but around the walnut table. I brought in my team. I brought in the pastor. I brought in the fish plant foreman and Sarah, the teacher. I showed them the contract. "It's impossible," Jorge said, flatly. "It is," I agreed. "For me, a one, in this shed." I turned to the map. "But we are not a shed. We are an island. The school district needs 50 sets. I propose we break that order into 5 parts, 10 sets each." I looked at the fishermen, at the pastor. "You all have garages. You have basements. You have boat repair shops that are slow this time of year. I can't be a factory, but we can be an alliance. We can be 5 workshops, working in parallel." They were skeptical. "We're not woodworkers, Quinn," the pastor said. "You don't have to be." I said, "This was the second part of the plan." I turned to my precision table saw, the one good tool I owned. "My workshop won't be a factory. It will be a kit production facility. We won't ship tables. We will ship kits." I laid it out for them. For 1 week, my team and I would do nothing but precision cut every single component, every tabletop, every leg, every brace. We would use the table saw and my 3D printer to create jigs, drilling templates that were foolproof. We would pre-powder coat every metal part. "I will give you a box," I told them. "That is a table in a box. Every piece will be cut to a perfect tolerance. Every screw hole will be pre-drilled. All you have to do is assemble. I'll make a video, step by step. If you can use a drill and a wrench, you can build these tables." The fish foreman, the man who had given me the pallets, was the first to nod. "Decentralized production, like a fishing fleet. I'm in. My garage is heated." The pastor smiled. "My congregation has 3 garages. They're yours." In 2 days, we had our 5 production pods. The Nuniac School District, impressed by the community-sourced plan, advanced me 20% of the contract. It was just enough to buy the lumber and the steel. The Island Woodworking Alliance was born. For 7 days, my shed was a blur of high-speed work. The scream of the table saw was constant. We were a precision machine, creating stacks of identical, perfect-cut pieces. We created 50 kits. While my team handled the physical logistics, I upgraded the digital. Seatmap was good, but it was a standalone tool. I took the code, cleaned it up, and pushed it to a public server. I rebranded it Seatmap Public. I built a library. Now, any teacher, any shelter manager, any church pastor, anywhere, could access our library of pre-designed seating charts for free. There were layouts for classrooms, for soup kitchens, for board meetings, for family therapy. The idea was spreading beyond the hardware. The next problem was shipping. 50 classroom sets are a logistical nightmare on an island chain. We had no central trucking, no freight service. We had the mail. I went to the postmaster, a woman named Tegan, who ran the island's mail system, which consisted of 2 float planes, a handful of boats, and a single, battered van. I didn't give her a sales pitch. I showed her the map. "Tegan, you're the only one who goes to all these villages. You're the island's circulatory system. I have the tables. You have the boats." We didn't sign a complex freight contract. We signed a 1-page memorandum of understanding, handwritten on her post office letterhead. She would consolidate the tables from our 5 garage pods at the mail dock and use her existing routes to deliver them. The school district would pay her fuel stipend directly. It was a local solution, built on trust and the shared reality of the water. With every kit we packed, I included one last thing. It was a simple, postcard-sized card, printed at the local library. On one side was the photo Sarah had taken in Ozinkie, the kids in their circle. On the other, a short text. "This table has no head. It was built by your neighbors. It was designed so that every person sitting here has an equal seat, an equal voice, and an equal view. Welcome to the table." We were on schedule. The 5 pods were working. I saw them. Garages lit up at all hours. The sound of drills and quiet. Focused work echoing in the cold air. To celebrate the midpoint, I organized the night of tables. I asked everyone on the island who now had an equal seat table the library, the clinic, the church, the people who had bought them for their homes to host a dinner on the same night, at the same time. The theme, bring a dish, share a story. The Kodiak Daily Mirror reporter, the one who had come to my stew night, got wind of it. She didn't just write about it. She and her family hosted their own. The next day, the front page of the paper was a grid of 16 different photos, all sent in by readers, people in the bright library, families in their kitchens, the crowd in the church basement, all gathered around different tables, all built from the same idea. The headline was simple: Kodiak finds its seat. That afternoon, a video landed in my inbox. It was from Harlan. The video was shaky, filmed in his Seattle workshop. He panned across his own workbench, where a set of my open-source legs, built by his own hands, was sitting. "Look at this, kid," he growled, his face craggy and proud. "You started something. We're building a few sets down here, sending them to the shelter on 3rd Avenue. Your idea is crossing oceans." He panned the camera around his shop, where 3 other woodworkers were building more. The no-head table, from sea to shining sea. Keep going. His video sparked an idea. I still had no money for myself. The contract cash was all for materials. I opened a Patreon. I didn't ask for money for me. I asked for money for the next table. I called it the No Head Fund. The pitch was simple. Pledge $5 a month, and you'll help sponsor a free table for a domestic violence shelter or a halfway house. It started slow. 10 patrons. 20. It was small, but it was a steady incoming tide of support from people I would never meet. Harbor Crown, it turned out, was paying attention. They didn't send a lawyer. They sent a press release. They announced their new flagship winter product, the Regal Head Chair. It was a monstrosity of carved mahogany and black leather, advertised as the antidote to the confusion of modern leaderless meetings. It was a direct, public, ideological counterattack, and to make the point, they put it on sale, undercutting the price of my tables by half. They were trying to make my idea a niche, a joke. They were trying to recenter the conversation around the throne. I was furious. I wanted to write a blog post, to call them out, to fight them. But Harlan's words echoed in my head, from sea to shining sea. I didn't fight back. I let go. I logged into the open source server. I took every file I had, the new leg designs, the powder coating process, the CAD files for the jigs, the assembly videos, the code for Seatmap Public. I bundled it all into a single, new file. I called it OpenSpec 2.0, and I made it all public. I posted a single message on my warehouse blog and linked it on the Patreon and the Fairbanks forum. Harbor Crown is right about one thing. A chair is just a chair. An idea is something else. They can own their chair. They can't own this idea. The specs are now public. All of them. The idea of the no-head table doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. Build your own. Build it better. The 30th day. We stood on the dock in the pre-dawn dark. The 5 pods had delivered. 50 sets, which meant 50 tabletops, and 200 modular legs were stacked, wrapped, and palletized, waiting for Tegan's mailboat. We had done it. We had done it an entire 6 hours ahead of schedule. My team, the fishermen, the pastor, we were all there. We were exhausted, our hands raw, but we were buzzing. We drank coffee from the pastor's thermos and watched the sun come up and hit our work. The tables were delivered on time. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the Nuniac School District Superintendent. It wasn't an invoice. It was a report. She attached a video. A teacher, in a remote village, was holding a reading circle. The kids, who used to sit in rows, were now in a tight, engaged circle, passing a book around. "We've been tracking," the superintendent wrote. "Teachers are reporting an average of 28% higher participation from the traditionally quiet students. The shy kids. The ones in the back row. They're talking. Quinn, your tables are making them talk. I was sitting on the walnut slab, crying. When the phone rang, it was a number from New York. This is Quinn Howard. Ms. Howard, this is Emily Tate from the National News Network. We've been tracking a story. Something about no-head tables in Alaska. It sounds fascinating. We'd like to send a crew this Friday. I dropped the phone. I was terrified. A microphone, a camera, a national audience. It was the Thanksgiving table, magnified 1,000,000 times. It was a bigger, scarier platform, and I was sure I would be called wasted space all over again. My team wouldn't let me say no. You have to, boss, Mateo said. This isn't your table. It's ours. The crew arrived. They were slick, fast, and loud. They set up bright, hot lights in my cold warehouse, turning my sanctuary into a set. The reporter, Emily, was sharp and focused. Just talk to me. Quinn, tell me what happened, I stammered. I talked about wood. I talked about thermal coefficients. I was awful. I could feel the invisible presence of my father, of Patrick Donovan, standing just behind the camera, scoffing, taking up space. I'm not saying it right, I said, frustrated, looking away from the lens. Then just show me, Emily said, her voice kind. Show me what you built. I stopped. I remembered. This table was mine. This room was mine. I turned to the camera. The problem isn't the people, I said, the words finally coming. It's the furniture. We've just been using the wrong furniture, so I'm building a new kind. I took them to the walnut table, the one I had made for me. The cameraman, intrigued, moved in. He panned across the smooth, dark wood. What's that? He asked, zooming in on the engraving underneath. It's the motto, I said. He got his light, illuminating the words I had carved by hand. The camera pushed in, filling the frame. No head, Emily read, her voice soft. Equal hearts. The segment aired a week later. The last shot, the one the producers chose to end on, was the close-up of my carving. By the next morning, No Head Equal Hearts was trending. I was so overwhelmed by the texts and emails that I almost missed the one that mattered. It was from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was just honey. It was from my grandmother, my mother's mother, Maeve, a woman I hadn't seen in years, who lived in a small condo in Florida, a safe distance from Patrick's blast radius. The email was short. Quinn, honey, I saw you on the television. You look so strong. I've been watching what you're doing. I've never been very good at standing up to your father. But that table you made, the one with the carving, well, it's so beautiful it made me cry right here on my vinyl sofa. You're doing a good thing. Don't you stop. The national news segment acted like an accelerant on a dry piece of wood. The fire didn't just spread, it exploded. My cheap web server crashed within 10 minutes. The email inbox I used for orders, a simple, free account, was flooded, then frozen by the sheer volume. My phone, which had been quiet for so long, became a vibrating, useless brick of hot plastic, an avalanche of notifications from strangers, from old college acquaintances, from the open-source community, all sending the link to the segment. No Head Equal Hearts was no longer just a hashtag. It was a movement. The Seatmap public server, hosted on a slightly more robust platform, sent me an automated alert downloads had spiked by 3,000% in 1 hour. Teachers from Texas, community organizers from Detroit, tech startups from California, they were all grabbing the free layouts. I was sitting on a stack of pine planks, my head in my hands, trying to reboot the server from my phone. When the real call came through, the phone was buzzing so violently on the workbench that it was rattling against a can of screws. I was ignoring it, but this buzz was different. It wasn't a notification, it was a call. I picked it up. The screen, which had been a blur of unknown numbers, was suddenly still, and the name displayed on it made all the blood in my body turn to ice. Dad, It was not Patrick Donovan. It was not Charleston. It was Dad, the simple, childish, primary name I had never been able to bring myself to delete. I stared at it. He had not called me, not once, not since I had walked out of his house, not after the first credit card bill showed a gas station in Nebraska, not after I had, in a moment of naive hope, sent my new P.O. box. Just in case, there had been nothing, until now, until I was on national television. He did not want to talk to me. He wanted to talk to the person he had just seen on the news. He wanted to control the narrative. My thumb hovered over the red decline button. I could feel my heart. A heavy, panicked drum against my ribs. Declining would be a statement, but it would be a statement of fear. It would be running. My other thumb, the one that had gotten steady from holding a router, moved and pressed the green accept button. I put the phone to my ear. I said nothing. I just listened to the sound of the transcontinental satellite hiss, the 3,000-mile distance compressed into a tiny electronic whine. Quinn, his voice, it was exactly the same. It was not warm. It was not angry. It was sharp, cold, and immediate. The voice he used to command a boardroom. The voice that had, in one sentence, called me wasted space. I still said nothing. I would not be the first to speak. Quinn, are you there? I know you're there. I'm here, I said. My voice was low, steady. It sounded strange, even to me. It was not the voice of the girl who had sat at his small chair. It was the voice of the woman who had patched a roof in a gale. Well, he began, and I could hear the familiar cadence, the wind-up to a lecture. You've certainly made a splash. Your mother and I have been inundated. Inundated, not, we saw you, not, congratulations. People have been calling the house all morning, he continued, his voice tightening. Members of the club, our clients, all asking the same question, all wondering about this performance you put on. It was a news report, Dad, not a performance. Do not play semantics with me, he snapped. The first crack in his facade. You got on national television and you told some sob story, and you humiliated this family. You humiliated me. I never said your name, I said. It was a simple, clean, cold fact. The line went silent. The hiss of the satellite seemed to grow louder. I could hear him breathing, a sharp, controlled intake of air. I had just taken his power away. I hadn't used him. I had made him irrelevant. You didn't have to, he spat, his voice low and furious. You didn't have to say a name. A girl from Charleston. A family table. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every person at that club, every client I have, they're all talking about it. Is that your daughter, Patrick? The one who felt unwelcome. You've turned us into a joke. You've turned me into a tyrant. I just told the truth about a table I built. You built a business on self-pity, he yelled, the control finally breaking, the bourbon-fueled Thanksgiving rage coming clear over the line. You built it on some childish, dramatic fantasy that you were wronged. You were never wronged. Quinn, you were just different. You were not Cole, and you could never accept that. I accept it, I said. That's why I left. I'm not Cole. I'm not you. I'm here. You're in a shed in the Arctic. That's what you are, he shouted. And you're dragging our name through the mud. He paused. I could hear him getting himself back under control. When he spoke again, his voice was the falsely reasonable one, the one he used to close a deal. This is what you're going to do. This circus is over. You've had your little moment. It's time to come home. You'll shut that thing down. Harbor Crown. I've already spoken to their people. They're willing to make this right, to smooth it over. You will come back to Charleston. We will set you up with a real showroom. You can sell that honorary head chair thing. We'll release a statement about a family partnership. We will fix this. We will fix the narrative. I was speechless. The audacity, the absolute blind, consuming arrogance. He wasn't offering a truce. He was staging a hostile takeover of my life. He hadn't seen a daughter. He had seen a rogue. publicly traded asset, and he was trying to reabsorb it into the parent company. I'm not coming home, Dad. I am home. Quinn, I am not asking you. Patrick. A new voice cut into the call. It was a woman's voice, sharp, clear, and with an authority that I had not heard in decades. It was my grandmother, Maeve. I flinched. She must have been on speakerphone. He had called me on speakerphone to have an audience for his victory. Patrick, that is enough, Maeve's voice said, crackling over the line from Florida. Maeve, stay out of this. This is a family matter. I am family, you fool, she snapped. And I have been listening to you bully that girl for 20 years, and I am done with it. I watched that program. She did not humiliate you. She honored herself. She's not taking up space. Patrick, she is making space. Something you never learned how to do. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Her voice rose, strong and clear. I sat at your mother's table, and she was a tyrant, and you learned it from her, and you passed it right down. This ends. What Quinn is doing. It's the only thing that's made sense in our family in a long, long time. You should be ashamed. There was a sound, a fumbling, and then a loud, definitive click. He had hung up. I stood in the silence of my warehouse. The phone in my hand was just a piece of plastic again. I was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the shock of an unexpected ally, a word spoken in my defense that I had never, ever heard. I sank down onto the walnut table, my hand resting on the wood Harlan had sent. My phone buzzed again. A gentle, single ping. A text. It was from Mom. The message was not a photo. It was just words. Tentative. Small. I heard the call. He is your father. I am so sorry. What you have built looks beautiful. I want to see it. If you would let me, I would like to come to Kodiak. I read the text, and I read the subtext. The fear, the hope, the first, tiny step out from under his shadow. She had never, ever defied him. Not in a text, not in a thought. I typed back. I didn't think. I just wrote the new rules. I'll send you a ticket. There are 2 conditions. She wrote back instantly. Anything. 1, you sit at my table. The walnut one. With my team, with my friends. 2, at this table. There are no head chairs, and there are no humiliating toasts. The 3 dots, her typing. They appeared, disappeared, appeared again. A long, agonizing minute. Then, I accept. My God. She had accepted. My phone pinged again. A different app. An Instagram direct message. It was from Cole. Saw you're a big TV star now. Mom is a mess. Are you happy you've split the family? Grow up and stop all this drama. It's just furniture. I read his message. It's just furniture. He was his father's son. He would never, ever get it. He saw the object, not the system. I didn't block him. I didn't reply. I just muted the conversation. The next day, the online battle began. Harbor Crown, furious at their failed PR spin, went on the offensive. They couldn't fight me on quality, not after my stress test, so they fought me on ideology. They hired a dozen high-end lifestyle influencers, all of whom simultaneously posted beautiful, filtered photos of themselves sitting at, you guessed it, the heads of their magnificent, expensive tables. The captions were all variations on a theme. A circle is a lovely fantasy, but real leadership means taking your seat. Don't be afraid to be the head of your own table. Inclusivity is great, but a family needs a leader. They were making no head a dirty word. They were calling it weak. My new supporters were screaming for me to fight back, to post my own think piece. I ignored them. I went to my files. I found the photo from the Nuniac School District, the one of the reading circle, the children, all equal, all looking at each other. The shy girl in the corner finally speaking. I posted that one. Single photo. My caption was 7 words. When everyone looks at everyone, everyone speaks. I turned off my phone. That night, I was alone in the warehouse. The media requests were handled. My team was paid and building. The world was loud. But in my shed, it was quiet. I opened my laptop. I went to my audio files. I found the one labeled Thanksgiving. I put on my good headphones, the ones I use for calibrating, and I pressed play. His voice filled my ears. Kids who go out and make you proud. The pause, the chuckle. And then there are kids who just take up space. The laughter followed. Cole's bark, Jessica's shrill giggle, the uncles, the aunts. I listened to it. The audio quality was good. I could hear the clink of his glass. I could hear my mother's small, aborted shh sound. It was my evidence, my honor scar. The recording that had fueled me, that had been my miter saw, my welding torch. And as I listened to it, I realized it had no power. The voices were tinny. The laughter was hollow, pathetic. They sounded small. They sounded 3,000 miles away. They sounded like they were in a different, tiny, muffled room, and I was outside in the cold, clean air. I didn't need the evidence anymore. I didn't need their voices to fuel me. I had my own. I put my cursor on the file. I dragged it to the trash. I clicked empty trash. The file was gone. I was free. I stood up. I walked over to the walnut table. I plugged in my handheld Dremel. I flipped it on. The high-pitched whine filling the quiet night. I found a clean, untouched spot on the underside, near my first carving. I lowered the spinning tool to the wood. My hand was perfectly steady. I carved a new line, right below. No head, equal hearts. If they don't give you a seat, bring the table. A week later, just before my mother's flight was due to arrive, a package came. It was from Florida, from Maeve. It was a small, heavy box. I opened it. Inside, wrapped in soft, acid-free paper, was a folded piece of linen. I lifted it. It was an antique, handmade lace tablecloth. It was impossibly intricate, the work of 100 hours, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. A note, on her flowery, old-world stationery, was pinned to it. Quinn, this was my grandmother's. It has sat on every important table in my life, and a few very unimportant ones. I kept it hidden from your father, because I knew he would spill something on it and not care. Your walnut table is beautiful, but it looks very hard. Every table needs a little soft history. 2. Love, Grandma Maeve. I called it the New Table Night. The name was simple, but the preparation was not. For 2 days, we cleaned the warehouse. We had moved, by this point, from a single, freezing shed to the unit next door as well. The original tin box was no longer a frantic, desperate workshop. It was our showroom. We had cleared the center of the floor, moved the table saws and drill presses against the walls. The heavy machines, coated in fine sawdust, looked like silent, sleeping guardians. In the center of the room, on the clean-swept concrete floor, sat the walnut table, Harlan's table. It was the heart, and I had surrounded it with 3 of the pine and steel tables we had built for the Nuniac schools, a constellation of equal surfaces. My team, Mateo, Jorge, and Maria, had strung up hundreds of feet of cheap, warm white string lights. They crisscrossed the high metal rafters, reflecting off the patched tin roof, turning the cold, industrial box into a kind of secular cathedral. The effect was surprisingly beautiful. The frost had already begun to form on the outside of the high windows, the tiny crystals catching the light, making it look like the stars were on the inside. I had put up a sign-up sheet at the post office. New table night, a potluck, bring a dish that reminds you of home, bring yourself, all are welcome. I had no idea who would come. They started arriving just after 6, as the winter dark became absolute, and they came. My God, did they come? It was the entire island. It felt like Sarah, the teacher from Uzinkie, who had driven the ferry over with 2 other teachers and a massive steaming casserole of mac and cheese, the fish plant foreman, the one I'd traded work with, who walked in, nodded at me, and placed a huge, perfect, smoked salmon on the table. No words needed. The pastor, with his wife, carrying a vat of hot cider, the librarian, the nurses from the clinic, The fishermen I'd seen on the docks, their faces raw from the wind, who brought bags of fresh sourdough bread, and the people from the open table nights, the woman who lived on her boat, the runaway teenager, who was now working part-time for Jorge, the men from the halfway house, my family of choice, as Maeve had called them. The air filled with the smell of them. It wasn't the singular, oppressive smell of one turkey, one performance. It was a chaotic, democratic, and glorious harmony of 100 different homes. It was dill and butter. It was rich, dark caribou stew. It was spicy Filipino adobo from a nurse's kitchen. It was the sharp, clean smell of the salmon and the sweet steam of the cider. A cab, a rare sight, pulled up to the front. The door opened. My grandmother, Maeve, emerged, wrapped in a bright blue coat I didn't recognize. She looked small against the vast Kodiak dark. I went out to meet her. "You came," I said, my voice thick. "Of course I came," she said, her voice tart, her eyes bright. "I told you, I'm done being quiet." She was carrying a bag. From it, she pulled the antique lace tablecloth. "Grandma, it's a workshop," I said, gesturing to the concrete. "It's dirty." "Nonsense," she said, marching past me. She walked straight to the walnut table. She stopped, just looking at it. Then, slowly, she reached out one small, liver-spotted hand and laid it flat on the wood. She closed her eyes. "Oh, Quinn," she whispered, not to me, but to the table. "You're right. Harlan was right. This wood is alive." She ran her hand over the carved edge. "It's as warm as your back. Honey, it's got your strength." She then unfolded the lace. It was a rectangle. The table was a free-form slab. She didn't try to center it. She just draped it, asymmetrically, over one corner. The delicate, ancient white lace spilling over the dark, modern, scarred wood. It was perfect, past and present. Another cab pulled up. My mother, Eileen. She stood in the doorway, her good wool coat from Charleston looking thin and inadequate. Her eyes were wide, panicked. She was a creature of polished mahogany and high-gloss finishes, and she had just been dropped into a noisy, joyful, concrete-floored tin shed full of strangers and the smell of fish. She saw me. Her face was a mask of, "What do I do?" She was looking for her assignment, her role, her place setting. I walked over to her. I didn't hug her. I didn't scold her. I just took her coat, like I would for any guest. "Mom," I said, "I'm glad you're here." Her eyes darted around. "Quinn, where should I sit?" I looked at her. The question was so deep. She was asking me where her seat at the new table was. Was it at the head? The foot? The small chair in the corner I just pointed, not to one chair, but to all of them, to the mass of people. "Anywhere," I said. "There are no assignments here. Just find a seat that looks good next to someone you don't know." She looked terrified, but she nodded, a small, bird-like motion, and clutched her purse as she took the first, tentative step into the crowd. When the tables were groaning with food, I picked up a metal ladle and tapped it gently on the side of the cider vat. The room quieted. Slowly, the laughter dying down to a warm hum. I stood by the walnut table, but not at its head. I stood on the side. "Hi," I said. My voice was amplified, not by a microphone, but by the community's sudden attention. "Welcome to the new table night. We have one rule." I pulled out my phone and projected the SeatMap public app onto the big, white, tin wall. A new screen popped up, the one I had coded just for tonight. "At this table," I read, "there is no head. There are no toasts that force other people to sit in silence. There are no performances." I put the phone away. "Instead, we're just going to eat, and we're going to talk, and if you have a story, we'd like to hear it." And that was it. The noise level swelled again, and the great, beautiful, chaotic sharing of food began. The stories started happening on their own, not as a performance, but as conversations. I walked, my plate full, and just listened. I heard a nurse from the clinic, sitting next to the fish foreman, say, "For 20 years, at every hospital meeting, I've been just a nurse. I'm expected to sit against the wall, not at the table with the doctors. Here, I just feel like a person." I heard one of the fishermen, a man with a face like a map of the ocean, talking to Sarah, the teacher. "My whole life, I've been told I'm not welcome at nice tables because I smell like my job. I smell like fish. I smell like work." He took a deep, happy breath of the food-filled air. "It smells like work in here. It smells great." And I saw the kids, Mateo's younger siblings, the pastor's grandchildren. They weren't at a kids' table, shoved in a kitchen. They were right there, their high, piping laughter mixing with the adults, their chairs raised up by the modular legs to be exactly, perfectly level with everyone else. My phone buzzed. It was a video call. It was Harlan. I accepted and turned the camera around. "You're missing a good party." "Harlan," his gravelly voice came through the speaker. "I'm not missing it. Kid, I'm right there." He was at his own table, a beer in his hand. "Do me a favor. Hold the phone up. I want to hear it." "Hear what?" "The sound. Quinn," he said. "I want to hear the sound of the forks and knives on the wood, the sound of a table being used." I held the phone out. I walked it past the crowds. I captured it. The sound of 100 conversations, the clink of glasses, the scrape of forks, the laughter. It wasn't the high, thin, nervous vibration of crystal. It was the warm, solid, resonant sound of a community, eating together. "That's it," Harlan's voice crackled. "That's the music. You did it, kid. You did it." He hung up. I found a quiet spot, just watching. The local reporter was there, the one who had written the no-head caption. She wasn't interviewing anyone. She wasn't taking notes. She was just eating. She was eating a bowl of stew and laughing with the woman who lived on her boat. She was a guest, not a journalist. I looked for my mother. It took me a minute to find her. She was sitting at one of the school tables. She was wedged between Maeve and a woman I recognized from the shelter, a woman who had come to our first open table nights, whose face was marked by a hard, hard life, my mother, Eileen, who I had only ever seen practice a polite, strained smile, my mother, who I had only ever seen speak to people of her class. My mother was laughing. It was not a giggle. It was a real, deep, unpracticed laugh. The woman from the shelter had just told a story, and my mother was wiping a tear of genuine mirth from the corner of her eye. She was looking at this woman, not as a project, not as someone below her, but as an equal. The ice, the glacier I had been watching her be frozen in for 25 years, was not just melting, it had cracked. A huge tectonic piece had just broken off and fallen into the sea. I felt my own eyes blur. I walked back to the walnut table. I picked up, not a glass of champagne, but a hot, steaming mug of the pastor's cider. I tapped my spoon against it, gently. The room quieted again. I held up the mug. "I just have one thing to say," I said, my voice thick. "This toast is for anyone who has ever been made to feel like they were sitting on the edge, for anyone who was ever told they were in the way, or too loud, or too quiet, or not enough." I looked around the room, at all of them, at my team, at Maeve, at my mother, who was watching me, her face open and new. "Welcome," I said. "In this room, at this table, there are no edges." I took a sip, and all around the room, in the warm, bright light, I heard the sound, not applause, not a shout. It was the sound of 100 spoons, gently, quietly, tapping against 100 tables, against 100 mugs, against 100 plates. It was a small, resonant, wooden sound. It was the sound of a pact. The front door of the warehouse, the big metal one, creaked open on its rollers, letting in a swirl of icy black air and a dusting of fresh snow. The night was bitter, freezing, and vast, but in here, around the wood, at the table, we were warm. The high from the new table night lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, the warehouse was still filled with the lingering, warm smell of cider and stew. My mother and my grandmother, Maeve, were sitting at the walnut table with me, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs, our quietest, most peaceful family meal. My mother, Eileen, was telling a story about the woman from the shelter, her eyes bright with a new, strange light. Then my laptop, open on the workbench, chimed. It was an email. It was marked, urgent, legal notice. It was from the General Counsel of Harbor Crown. It was a cease and desist. Maeve, can you and Mom read those new orders that came in? I said, my voice steady. I didn't want them to see my face. I walked over and read the PDF. My blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. They were accusing Equal Seat Works of willful and malicious intellectual property theft. They were claiming patent infringement and trademark dilution. They were demanding I immediately, within 24 hours, stop all production, take down my website, and retract my open source files. But the most insane part, the part that made my head spin, was the attachment. It was their patent pending application, and the design in the technical drawings was mine. It was my modular leg. It was my pin and sleeve mechanism. Miles Thorne, that son of a bitch, hadn't just been trying to buy my company. He had been staging a theft. They had taken my open source files, filed for a patent on them as their own, and were now using that filing to sue me for stealing my own invention. My mother saw the color drain from my face. Quinn, honey, what is it? It's a mistake, I said, my voice a whisper. They're saying I stole my own design. Eileen's hand flew to her mouth, the old fear returning. Patrick, she whispered, he'll know what to do. We should call your father. No, Maeve said, her voice like steel. She put her coffee mug down with a hard, definitive thud. We will not call Patrick. This is not his world. This is a new world, and he has no power here. She looked at me. Who do we call? I thought of Harlan. I thought of his network. I have an idea, I said. I made one call. To Harlan's shop in Seattle. I explained. He just grunted. Anya, you need Anya. She's a pro bono shark. Works with the open source community. She eats suits like Miles Thorne for breakfast. I'll send her your number. Anya called me within the hour. I didn't even have to explain. I saw the national segment. Quinn, I saw the No Had Equal Hearts tag. I've been following Harbor Crown's response. I was waiting for this. Send me the PDF. I sent it. She called back in 10 minutes. Her voice was fast, sharp, and utterly devoid of fear. I've got it, she said. Got what? A defense? No, Anya said, and I could hear her smiling. I've got the kill shot. They made a fatal, arrogant, top-down mistake. Did you look at their patent filing? Really look at it. It's my design, I said. Yes, it's your OpenSpec 2.0 design. They downloaded it, right from your Git, and in their haste to file, they forgot one tiny, crucial step. I waited. They are bound by the Creative Commons license you published it under, just like everyone else. The BY attribution, they're allowed to use it, even for profit, but they are legally required to attribute the original design to you, in their filing, in their marketing, in everything. And they didn't. They filed it as their invention. They didn't just steal. Quinn, they committed perjury on a patent application and violated the very license they're trying to use as a weapon. They didn't just bring a knife to a gunfight. They brought a knife that's a boomerang, and they've already thrown it. I felt the logic of it, the beauty of it, click into place. Make, fail, fix, snap. What do I do? Anya. Legally. We send a counter-demand. We file a motion to have their patent application voided. It'll take 6 months. It'll be boring. What's the other option? Anya laughed. The other option. You're the one who built the open source community. This is their moment. You fight a top-down corporation by activating a horizontal network. You don't fight them in a courtroom. You fight them in public. You just did it. Do it again. Harder. I hung up. I looked at my mother and my grandmother. They made a mistake, I said. I didn't write a long, angry blog post. I didn't hire a lawyer to send a scary letter. I turned on my webcam. I set it up on a stack of pine. I hit record. The video was 5 minutes long. I was calm. I was not angry. I was a teacher. Hello, I said, looking into the lens. I'm Quinn Howard, from Equal Seat Works. Yesterday, many of us celebrated the new table night. This morning, I received this. I held the cease and desist up to the camera. This is from Harbor Crown. It says I stole my modular leg design, and this, I held up their patent application. Is there proof? The problem is, this design, I held up my own original, hand-drawn schematic, the one I'd drawn months before. I'll make this simple, I said. I believe in the no-head table. I believe in it so much that I gave the design away for free, on the open internet, for anyone to use. That's called open source. Harbor Crown, a billion-dollar company, took my free design, filed a patent to try and lock it up, and are now suing me for the key I gave everyone. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated the facts. This isn't just about my company. This is about whether we are allowed to share good ideas. I am not taking my files down. I am not ceasing production. Then I made my move. Instead, I'm publishing everything, I said. My entire repository, every time-stamped file, every Git commit, every late-night design change. Going back 2 years, you can see the work. You can see the timeline. It's all there. I looked at the camera. And I'm publishing the link to Harbor Crown's fraudulent patent application. You can see their timeline, too. It starts 2 weeks after my national news segment. You decide. I ended the video. I posted it. I linked the data. I went back to my coffee. The internet took over. It was the Fairbanks Collective who struck first. They posted a duet with my video. We're building from Quinn's stolen specs right now. Guess we're thieves, too. Harbor Crown. Harlan's shop in Seattle posted a video. We've built 10 of these stolen tables for the shelter on 3rd. Come and get us. Woodworkers from Oregon to Maine, people I had never heard of, started posting. They downloaded my specs, filmed themselves building the legs, and all used the same hashtag, We're All Equal Seat. Harbor Crown's social media pages. Their sleek, minimalist photos of regal head chairs were buried under an avalanche of my blueprints. They made their second, fatal mistake. They doubled down. Their lawyers released a public statement. We are disappointed by Ms. Howard's inflammatory and amateur response. We will be pursuing this matter in federal court to the fullest extent of the law. They were threatening a war I couldn't afford. They wanted to drag me into a 10-year million-dollar legal battle. Anya called. They're trying to scare you into submission. Quinn, they want to bankrupt you. I know, I said. So let's not play their game. I'm not going to wait for them to sue me in New York. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this is a Kodiak problem, I said. I'm not a national corporation. I'm a local business, and I'm being bullied. I'm going to request an emergency public hearing right here with the Kodiak Island Fair Trade Board. Anya was silent for a second. That is beautiful. You're dragging them off their home turf, onto yours. They'll be forced to send their $5,000 an hour lawyers to a community center gym in Alaska. It's brilliant. I filed the motion. The board, run by the postmaster Tegan and the owner of the hardware store, granted it. The hearing was set for 1 week, but I wasn't just going to fight them with data. I was going to fight them with people. I took 5 of our tables. I hauled them to the town square, right in front of the harbor master's office. I set them up in a circle, and on each table, I placed a story. I went back to the nurse, the fisherman, the woman from the shelter, the teacher. I asked them to write, in their own words, what the table meant. The fisherman's note, taped to a fur tabletop, read, I ate at this table and didn't have to apologize for the smell of my work. The teacher's note read, this table gave my shyest student a voice. The public, my public, started signing a petition in support. But the real data, the real kill shot, came from the Nuniac School District. The superintendent sent me an official, notarized letter, which I taped to the center table. To whom it may concern, since the installation of the equal seat tables, our district has recorded a 28% increase in classroom participation from students previously identified as nonverbal or at risk. This design is now a formal part of our curriculum. It was a data bomb. The national news, sensing a David and Goliath story, came back. This time, I wasn't scared. This time, I was ready. Emily Tate, the reporter, found me in the square, polishing the tables in the cold. "Quinn, they're suing you." "They're trying," I said. "They think they can, because they think this is about furniture. It's not." I tapped the table. "This is a power structure. Harbor Crown wants to sell you a throne. They want to sell you the regal head chair. I want to give you a circle, and that, it turns out, is a very threatening idea." The segment aired that night. The call from Harbor Crown's lawyers to Anya's office came at 6 a.m, the day before the public hearing. They were withdrawing the cease and desist. They were withdrawing the patent application. They wanted this to go away. "Not so fast," Anya told them. "Quinn has suffered damages to her reputation, to her business." HC's lawyers, desperate, made an offer. We'll make a donation. We want to be partners. We propose a Harbor Crown and equal seat moral partnership. We can co-brand a line. We'll give her a percentage." They were still trying to buy me, to absorb me, to put their logo on my soul. I told Anya my terms. She laughed for a solid minute. "Oh my God, you're a monster. I love it." She called them back. "Here's the deal. There is no partnership. You will not co-brand. You will not use Ms. Howard's name or likeness in any of your materials, ever." "What's the offer?" the lawyer asked, confused. "You're going to make a donation," Anya said. "You're going to wire 100% of the funds required for the No Head Fund to produce and ship 100 free tables to 100 underfunded schools and women's shelters, to be chosen by Ms. Howard." "That's it?" the lawyer asked, suspicious. "That's it," Anya said. "No press release from you, no logo on the tables, no regal head chair. You just pay. You're going to fund, anonymously, the very movement you tried to kill. You're going to pay for your sin, and you don't even get to tell anyone you've been saved." They were trapped. If they said no, they had to show up in Kodiak, in front of national news cameras, and get torn apart by a school district and a bunch of fishermen. If they said yes, they had to fund their own competition. They signed the agreement 2 hours later. The wire transfer hit the No Head Fund by noon. Anya called me. "Well done, counselor," she said. The game was flipped. That night, my phone pinged. A text. From Dad. He had not texted me since I'd left. Not one word. I opened it. "Heard you won? Good. Your mother is on a flight home. It's time to stop this. Come home to Charleston. I'll make dinner." I stared at the text. Come home. I'll make dinner. The old script. The old table. The assumption that my victory was just a prelude to my returning to his orbit. He still thought he was the head of the table. I took a breath. I opened the link to my warehouse web store. I found the page I had just created. For tickets. I texted him back. I sent him the link. "I'm hosting the second new table night next month. Here's the ticket page. It's open to the public." I added one line. "At my table, everyone is equal. If you want to come." I sent it. I watched the phone. A minute later, the bubble under his name popped up. "Seen?" He didn't reply. He didn't buy a ticket. He just saw, and I knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that he was coming, not as a guest, but as Patrick Donovan. He was coming to my table, on my turf, to finish this. The night of the second new table night. A soft, fine snow was falling. It was a forgiving snow, the kind that hushes the world. that turns every sharp edge to a soft curve. Inside the warehouse, it was the opposite of silent. It was a beacon. We had rolled up the big metal doors on two sides of the workshop, not to let the cold in, but to let the light out. We had a dozen propane heaters running, creating a perimeter of warmth, and the entire warehouse glowed, a cube of golden, human light in the vast Alaskan dark. The walnut table, Harlan's table, sat in the center. With Maeve's lace draped over one corner, it looked less like a piece of furniture and more like an altar, a beating heart for the room. The place was packed. The island community, my team, my mother Eileen, and my grandmother Maeve, who was holding court by the cider vat, telling a story to the fish plant foreman. This time, the national news segment was not a segment. It was a full, active, multi-camera live stream. We had a projector aimed at the wall, showing the feed, showing the comments as they poured in, and above it all, my team had hung a banner. It was painted on a piece of salvaged sailcloth, the letters clean and black. It was the thesis statement for my entire life. Some kids make their parents proud, others make the world equal. I was by the sound system, checking the levels on the speakers. When the snow outside the open door seemed to darken, a figure, stark and black, was standing there, framed by the falling snow and the golden light. He was not invited. He had not bought a ticket. Patrick Donovan. He walked in, brushing the snow from the shoulders of his dark, expensive cashmere coat. He was not a guest. He was a general, arriving to inspect a battlefield. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He scanned the crowd, the tables, the string lights, the banner. He was assessing the room, measuring the power structure, looking for the weakness. His gaze found me. He did not smile. He simply nodded, a curt, "So this is it," gesture, and began to move. He walked past the community tables. He walked directly to the center of the room, to the walnut table, and then, in a motion so practiced it was unconscious, he tried to find the head. I watched him. He walked to the end of the rectangular space, but the chairs were arranged in a circle. He looked at the other end. It was the same. There was no single, throne-like, elevated position. The geometry of the room was, itself, a defense against him. He looked confused. Then, with a flicker of annoyance, he simply created a head. He grabbed a stray chair, pulled it to the end of the walnut table, and placed it there, separate from the circle, creating a position of power through sheer force of will. He sat. The buzz of the room, the happy, chaotic noise, faltered. People noticed. The old system had just invaded the new. Patrick Donovan raised his hand, gesturing for silence. He had a glass in his hand. I didn't know where he had gotten it. "May I have your attention?" he said. His voice was not a request. It was a command. It was the Thanksgiving voice. It cut through the warmth, and the room went cold and quiet. My mother, Eileen, looked like she had seen a ghost. Maeve just stared at him, her face hard. "I am Patrick Donovan," he said, as if anyone needed the introduction. "I've come a very long way, and I'd like to make a toast." He stood, holding the glass high, the old familiar gesture. "To my daughter," he said, his eyes locking on me. He smiled, a thin, politician's smile. "My daughter, who has made all of this noise." He paused, for effect. "To Quinn Howard, who, after all this time, has finally learned how to take up space in the right place." The insult was so subtle, so perfectly crafted. He was trying to co-opt me, to frame my rebellion as just another step on a path he approved of, to absorb my new world into his old one. He raised his glass. "To Quinn." No one moved. No one drank. The silence was absolute. And then, on the projector screen behind him, a new message appeared. It was from the Seatmap public app, which was moderating the speaking schedule. A gentle, automated, public notification popped up. "A single speaker has been active for more than 120 seconds. We invite other voices to join the conversation. Please pass the microphone." The room was silent for one more beat, and then the fish foreman let out a single, sharp bark of a laugh. The librarian giggled, and then the whole room, the entire community, burst into laughter. It was not the cruel laughter of Thanksgiving. It was the bright, warm, disbelieving laughter of a system that had just seen its own gentle power work in real time. They were not laughing with him. They were laughing at the very idea of him. Patrick's face went white. He had just been publicly, impersonally, and technologically checked. His power, his voice, his toast, it had all just been neutralized by a piece of code. Sarah, the teacher from Uzinki, the one I designated as the night's coordinator, stepped forward. She was not intimidated. She was a teacher, used to dealing with unruly children. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice clear and kind, "thank you for that lovely sentiment. But at this table, we listen first. We've asked a few people to share their stories. Please," she gestured, not to his self-appointed throne, but to a seat in the circle. "Sit, join us, listen." He was trapped. To refuse was to prove himself a tyrant. To accept was to surrender. He stared at her. Then, slowly, his jaw tight, he moved his chair. He didn't join the circle, not yet. He just sat, his back rigid. Sarah smiled and turned to the room. "We're going to start." The stories began. They were the ones who had been pushed to the edge. A young boy, one of Sarah's students, stood up. He read from a piece of notebook paper. "My name is Leo," he said, his voice shaking. "Before, at the old desks, I sat in the back. I never raised my hand. I was scared. Now," he looked at his teacher, "now, everyone can see me. Everyone looks at me. So I talk. I'm not scared to talk." A woman from the shelter, the one my mother had laughed with, stood next. "My name is Anna," she said. "I've spent a lot of my life eating in basements, eating fast, eating with my head down. You don't want to be seen. The night I came here, to the first stew night, it was the first time in 10 years I had a meal where I did not bow my head. I looked at the people across from me, and they looked at me. That's all." She sat down. The room was quiet, and then a new voice. "My name is Eileen." I turned. It was my mother. She was standing up, her hands shaking, her purse clutched in her hands. I am Quinn's mother," she said, her voice small, but clear in the silence. She was looking directly at Patrick. "For 30 years, she said, "I lived in a house of beautiful, polished, expensive things, and I was taught that the most important thing was to keep them polished, to keep them quiet. I thought silence was peace. I thought if I kept everyone happy, if I smoothed everything over, that was love." She took a breath, and her voice cracked. "I was wrong. I see it now. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was just erasing my own child. I was letting her be erased." She looked at me, her eyes streaming, but her voice getting stronger. "I am so sorry, Quinn, and I am so proud. This is not noise. This is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard." She sat down, and Maeve put her arm around her. The room was still. The camera was on my mother. The live stream comments were a blur of hearts. Patrick Donovan just sat. He stared at his wife. He was not angry. He looked broken. He had just heard a truth he could not fight. His own wife, his own silent partner, had just delivered the final, fatal testimony. Slowly, his shoulders, the broad, proud shoulders that had taken up so much space, began to slump. He looked at his hands. He looked at the table. And then, in a gesture of complete, unconscious surrender, he did what my mother had done, what Maeve had done. He reached out and laid his hand, his big, powerful, patriarch's hand, flat on the dark walnut. His fingers, I saw, were resting directly on the carving. No head, Equal hearts. I stood up. I didn't want him to be the center of this. I didn't want this to be his drama, his redemption. This was not his night. It was ours. At this table, I said, my voice projecting across the room. We have a rule. It's a simple one. We do not raise one person up by pushing another person down. We don't build our success on someone else's silence. We make the table wider. We add more chairs. I looked at Sarah. Who's next? The night continued. Seat map projected a soft, glowing border around 12 different people in the crowd, inviting them to speak. A fisherman, a nurse, Mateo, my mother, Maeve, the boy, each one, a 2-minute story. A new structure of power, distributed, shared, and timed. Finally, the app's glowing border landed on the last person in the circle. It landed on Patrick Donovan. He looked up, surprised. He had been invited. Not by me, but by the system. He stood. He was not at the head of the table. He was just a seat in the circle. He was not holding a glass. He looked at the table. He looked at my mother. He looked at me. He started, and his voice was gone. The boom, the command. It was all gone. His voice was hoarse, old. I am a man who builds things. That's what I do. I build companies. I build legacies. He touched the wood. I came here to see what this was, and I didn't get it. He shook his head, struggling. Maybe, he said, so quietly the microphone barely picked it up. Maybe it's because I didn't see what you were building. I was too busy looking at my own chair. He sat down. It was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was a start. I walked over to him. He looked up, his eyes wary. I looked down at him. That's okay, I said, my voice just for him. This table is wide enough for people who are willing to learn how to sit again. He looked like he was about to say more. He looked like he was about to launch into a long, self-justifying speech. A new kind of performance. I saw it coming, and I gently, finally, shut it down. I walked over to the workbench where my old, resurrected transistor radio, my first friend, was sitting. I clicked it on. A low, warm, complex sound filled the warehouse. A saxophone, a piece of quiet, intelligent jazz. It was not a sound of argument. It was not a sound of speeches. It was a sound of community. It cut off his words, not with violence, but with something better. The room let out a collective breath. The tension was over. I went back to the walnut table. I picked up my mug of hot tea. I held it high. To the new table, I said. All over the room, people raised their mugs of tea, their cups of cider. No champagne, no bourbon, no clinking of fragile crystal, just the sound of 100 spoons gently tapping on warm, wooden tables, a new kind of toast, a pact. I walked to the walnut table. I smoothed my hand over Maeve's antique lace, which covered one half. Then I smoothed my hand over the other half. The bare, scarred, strong wood, the past and the present. They didn't have to fight. They could both be here. They could finally, after all this time, sit together on the projector. The live stream comments were flying, a river of words from all over the world. Doing this in my classroom tomorrow. No head table at our house from now on. Making the world equal, the camera, the live stream, was panned across the room. It landed on me. I knew it was on me. I was supposed to be the star, the victor, but I wasn't looking at the camera. I turned. I looked at my mother, who was holding my grandmother's hand. I looked at Mateo, who was laughing with the fisherman. I looked at Sarah, at the boy, at the whole, messy, loud, warm, equal, beautiful family I had chosen. I smiled. Not for the camera, not for the audience, but for them. I didn't need to be seen anymore, because, finally, we were all seeing each other. Thank you for listening to my story. Please comment below. Let me know where you are listening from, so we can connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.